Okay, Erev Tov, God willing, we are picking up today from the middle of chapter 16. Um, let's go from verse number 13, 12 or 13. So when we last left off, we saw the transition, the very interesting transition from Shaul, who had his kingship ripped away from him because of his mistake with Amalek, and now the selection of David HaMelech. It had to be done in relative secrecy. Shmuel had to use an alibi when he went to Beit Lechem, where Yishai and his sons lived. And it wasn't until Hashem showed him that it was David that he realized that it was in fact David. It was not the one that he was expecting. Of all the sons of Yishai, who Shmuel thought were more fit, it was David that Hashem chose. And this indicates that there is a transition in the mode of leadership that Hashem is requesting. So to open tonight, I'll share a Gemara with you in Maseches Yuma. The Gemara there says that Shaul's failing was the fact that he didn't have any failings. The Gemara says that to make a successful leader, he has to have a kupa shel shatzim, talui al gabav. He has to have a pack of rodents on his back. Everyone's got to have some baggage.
Or skeletons in his closet.
Skeletons in your closet. There you go. That's the modernized version of it. Exactly. Updated version. So Shaul lacked any of that stuff. He came from a good tribe, one of the most important families in his tribe, a sterling track record. Everything looked great and smooth. He was head and shoulders above the whole nation, a perfect stature, a handsome man, all the benefits. But he checked too many boxes. And that, interestingly, the Gemara Yuma says it led to his downfall. Perhaps it's because it leads to a lack of humility or something else. As opposed to David HaMelech, we saw last time, he wasn't even invited to the party. When Shmuel, the prophet, told Yishai to bring his sons, because he's going to anoint one of them, Yishai brings 7 of his sons, and David is left in the field taking care of the sheep. You have to leave somebody behind. He left behind David. Like, he's probably not the one that Yishai wants, that Shmuel wants. But sure enough, it was David, the one who was not invited to the party, that was selected. And we have verses in Tehillim describing David's very difficult upbringing, that he was cursed and hated by his own brothers. And if you recall, we shared a very interesting soap opera-esque type of a midrash where David was perceived to be was thought to be a mamzer, an illegitimate child, not a son of Yishai, but illegitimate child. From the time that Yishai separated from his wife, she became pregnant, unbeknownst to Yishai, from him himself. Now, we said whether that's literally true, it's certainly expressing a reality that David was rejected, a bit the black sheep in the family. And that kind of upbringing is just what we need. And aside from his personal life story, there was an overarching issue with the whole line of David and Yishai, is the fact that they were from the nation of Moab. And although today, if you ask anybody on the streets, they'll tell you that a Moabite convert may not marry into the Jewish nation, but a Moabite convertess, a female convert from Moab, she may marry into the Jewish people. That's clear today, but back in the day, this was a hotly contested halacha, and there were generations when it was going back and forth and back and forth. And as we know, David was a descendant of Ruth HaMoabiyah from the nation of Moab. She was a female convert. So the bottom line halacha is that that's acceptable. She may marry a regular full-fledged Jew. However, in those days, it was contested. And that's what led Yishai to separate from his wife, according to that midrash that we mentioned. And so the very legitimacy of the whole family was in question. So talk about a pack of rodents on your back, right? This was not the family you would expect to produce the future king of the Jewish people. And that pack of rodents is exactly what Hashem wanted. That's what he wanted to select as a king. As Hashem said to Shmuel, don't look at the externals. Hashem sees the heart, and this is exactly what I want. And let's see today how this actually fares, how David fares with his upbringing. Okay. So the reason I chose verse number 12 to start with is because that's actually where the paragraph break is in the prophets there's spacing that we were given as part of the tradition is where to space the paragraphs. And interestingly enough, it seems like the end of one episode and the beginning of a new one that's joined in this new paragraph. And it's as follows. Hashem says to Shmuel, as we read last time, Ku mashcheu, meshachehu kizehu. Arise and anoint David, because this is the one that I've selected. And Shmuel takes the horn, and he anoints David bekerev echav, amidst his brothers. Meaning to say, even though all of them seemed more worthy, in their midst, he was anointed. Vatitzlach ruach Hashem el David. And the Spirit of God descended upon David. Interesting word, vatitzlach. If you'll recall, we had that by Shimshon. Passed over David. From that day and forward, the Spirit of God descended on David. Vayakum Shmuel vayelech haramata. And Shmuel arises and leaves. The Spirit of God descended upon David from that day and forward. That's what the verse says. The Radak writes that it was from this moment and forward that he possessed Ruach HaKodesh, that holy divine spirit, which gives you extra human knowledge and capabilities. Right? The human mind is capable of achieving until a certain limit using the regular faculties of logic and reason. Beyond that is Ruach HaKodesh, when there's a certain influence coming in from the outside where we are not humanly capable of achieving it on our own, with our own devices. Hashem sends Ruach HaKodesh to lift you beyond that. And from this moment and forward, David received that Ruach HaKodesh, that holy divine spirit that's reserved for the special people, and especially the leaders of the Jewish people. And here it descended upon David, and the Radak says from this day and forward, he was able to compose Tehillim, Psalms, that were all written with Ruach HaKodesh. That's why they were canonized into our holy books. They weren't just the product of human intelligence, they also possessed divine wisdom, and they were a product of that, Ruach HaKodesh. So from this day and forward, David was able to begin composing Tehillim. That's the Radak's interpretation. Additionally, I believe it's the Targum Yonatan. I don't have it in front of me. Just the Radak quotes him, who says that it was a special spirit of Gvura and bravery that left Saul, and descended upon David. As if to say, the king of Israel, he gets like a special spiritual boost that enables him to fight and be courageous. And that special spirit was with Saul, was with Shaul, as long as he was the king. And now Hashem has chosen David, and he's transferred that spirit to David. From this moment and forward, David is a true leader, so he possesses not just the Ruach HaKodesh, which you just mentioned, but also this courageous spirit which will enable him to fight the wars of Hashem. The very next verse, Pasuk 14, Beruach Hashem Sara Me'im Shaul. The Spirit of God departed from Shaul. Uviasatu Ruach Ra'am Eis Hashem. And in that place came a Ruach Ra'ah, an evil spirit from God. It wasn't just a natural depression that you feel when something's gone wrong. It was a special spirit sent by God to depress Shaul, a Ruach Ra, an evil spirit which made him melancholy and downcast. Now Shaul knew that he had lost the kingship. Shmuel told him, right? There was that scene when they stood together after the battle with Amalek. Shaul thought he had done so well, and Shmuel told him, you lost it, you failed. Shaul knew that he had lost the kingship. So that naturally leads to depression and a feeling of disappointment. He was a great man. We're speaking on his level, but everything we say about these superhuman humans. So he naturally would feel down. But here we're seeing that it was a Ruach Ra Me'et Hashem, that there was an extra added element that Hashem was injecting into Shaul, an extra added element of sadness. Perhaps it was to bring about this series of events that David is actually now going to be invited into the palace of Shaul to heal this spirit of melancholy. So the servants of Shaul tell him, and we're continuing in the verses, Hinena ruach Elohim ra'a mevaitecha. Behold, a spirit of melancholy from God torments you. Yumarna Adonenu, let our master, Avadecha lefanecha, yivakashu ish yodam, and again, bakinor. We're here at your service. Let's seek out somebody who knows how to play the kinor. Kinor possibly is a harp or maybe a stringed instrument. Seems to be different interpretations. or a wind instrument or a string instrument. Whenever you become downcast, let's find a good musician who can lift your spirits by playing this music with the kinor. From here, we actually, although we're dealing with the Shaul on the way down, with the descent of Shaul, we actually see the humility that he had within the palace. You don't find the servants of the king giving psychological advice to the king. Get out of here. What are you suggesting to the king what he should do? You're feeling sad. You have this wrong with you and this and that problem. What kind of servant would be able to diagnose his king and not have his head chopped off? The answer is Shaul was such a humble person that his servants did not feel that he would be threatened or feel spiteful if they told him that there's something wrong with him. That is actually an insight into the humility of Shaul and the way that he ran the kingdom. Although he was the leader, the VIP amongst the Jewish people, his servants still felt comfortable telling him that he has something wrong. Right now you're feeling melancholy, you should do this and that. They gave him a course of action he should take. So let's seek out a musician that can play for you. Okay, so Shaul says, Re'una li ish meitivlan again. He takes the advice. Find somebody who's good at playing an instrument. Ve'vutem elai. Don't just get me a regular musician. Find me a good musician, somebody who's meitivlan again, who can do a good job at it. That doesn't just know how to play the instrument, but he knows the right notes to lift up a broken spirit. And here we have a very interesting verse, very suggestive. Vayan echad mehanearim. One of the lads raised his voice, and he said, Hine ra'iti ben le'ishai. I saw a son for Yishai from Beit Lechem. Yodelin again. He knows how to play an instrument, which is the only criterion that Shaul asked for. But then he adds some more details. This attendant of Shaul, he adds, Vegibor Chayil, he's also valiant. Ve'ishmil Chamai, a man of war. Unvon Devar, he's very understanding. Ve'ishtar, and he's beautiful. V'Hashem Iman, God is with him. This attendant was really overdoing it. Shaul asked for a good musician, so all he had to say was, I know one. Let me go get David, the son of Jesse. For some reason, this attendant felt that it was necessary to speak of the praises of King David. Not only is he a good musician, he's a mighty man of valor, a man of war. He has good understanding. He's handsome. God is with him. What's going on over here? So Chazal, Rashi quotes Chazal. One of the attendants, this is referring to a very specific person, whose name was Doeg HaAdomi. Doeg is a character we're going to meet in the future. He was a shrewd and conniving politician. He was amongst the inner circle of Shaul. And what he was doing with this was, he was trying to already plant a seed of jealousy in Saul regarding David. That's what Chazal tells us, that he had here malicious intent. When he was praising and talking up David, it's because he knew, or he had a feeling, some sense that David might be taking over the throne, and therefore he already wanted to plant the seeds of jealousy to stop that, because right now he's in the inner circle. And if David gets the throne, then I'm not going to be in the inner circle anymore. So for his own political gain, he started planting seeds of jealousy. Now, the question is, how on earth did Doeg know that David's going to be the king? This was a private matter. David was anointed in secret. I don't know. Chazal don't indicate how he knew. It's likely that a guy like this, he's a talker, he's a gossip mongerer. As we'll see later, he's the one who informs on the one who gave David food, which ends up to Shaul destroying the entire city of Kohanim. We'll get there, God willing. He is a gossiper, and somebody who's a gossiper, he kind of he pays attention to everything going on around him, and he picks up on subtle clues, and he's very shrewd. So he likely knew that Shaul had lost the kingship, that this was coming. And he probably heard about the fact that Shmuel had come to Beit Lechem and was seeking out, and now nobody knew why he was there, but he can put one and two together, and perhaps he knew that there was some transition taking place that had to do with Shmuel going into Beit Lechem and inviting the family of Jesse to a private meeting. So it could be that that's how he knew, like, just gathering information with that kind of personality, and just to protect himself, he had already started planting seeds of jealousy regarding David. This is what Chazal tell us. I was just suggesting to you the way he might have found out about it, but
What
that's
was
only my
the
suggestion.
what was the geography, the geological distance between where Saul was sitting as king and Samuel anointing David? How far apart were they?
Good question. Let's see. Shaul was in a place called Givat Shaul, which we assume is in the territory of Benjamin, where he's from. Beit Lechem is in the territory of Yehuda, which is in the south. But they're neighboring, meaning the territory of Benjamin borders the territory of Yehuda. But the question is how far south are we talking? I don't know.
Well, it's how many days travel
Good
distance
question. I don't know.
They
that
could have had like a Pony Express.
Yeah. Yeah, you
because
can
this
assume the
is
prophet had, the fast camel.
because this is a similar parallel to Joseph's rise from prison with the wine keeper speaking to Pharaoh, giving Pharaoh advice about interpreting the dreams or whatever.
Fascinating. I mean, just yesterday he was the dejected boy out in the fields with the sheep, and then overnight he becomes the king of Israel. It's
Yeah.
fascinating. That's an interesting parallel you're drawing. It's an interesting
So
parallel you're drawing.
was David really handsome? He's described as ruddy, and we
Well,
didn't think ruddiest.
It's interesting. He's on the one hand he's described as a admoni, but he also it does say that he's yefei inayim. He has beautiful eyes, but tov ru'i, and a nice appearance. So that the ruddy adjective, it seems to indicate like a what do you call it?
Sunburn.
It could be that he had red hair. That could be. That's one interpretation.
Okay.
But also a propensity towards like war and blood. Sometimes you could see on somebody's face, even if they're hungry, even if they're handsome, excuse me, you could tell their personality by looking at them. He's very handsome, but you could tell he has like a taste for blood and he likes war and fighting. And so the Malbim says this is kind of reflecting the two different parts of David. On the one hand, he was this gentle shepherd, connected to God, beautiful and delicate. On the other hand, he was a man of war and blood. And when people looked at him, it must have been very confusing. Is this guy just like a hothead, or is he this spiritual giant that's super connected to God? It was two conflicting things inside of David. Just as perhaps as a spoiler, it could be that this is precisely why he was chosen to be the king of Israel. It's the job of the king, and especially of the Mashiach, like the king, to combine all the disparate elements of the Jewish people and bring them in. Right, the final redemption is going to be with Mashiach, who is the descendant of David, who brings together all the different facets of the Jewish people to become one united nation. And within him, he has these two almost opposite poles, and it was his job as an individual to find a way to unite them. And through that, he's able to lead the Jewish people who also have these two extremes and unite them. That perhaps is like a little thesis about the life of David. It's been suggested by numerous commentaries. I think there's one book on my shelf which I really enjoyed by Rabbi Moshe Eisman called David, the Sweet Singer of Israel, who suggests that. There's another book that's more famous called, I think it's called David, King of Israel. It's like a classic. I've only read parts of it, but everything I read is really good. I recommend that. That's more available than the first one I mentioned. If you're interested in reading more about David's life, in our context here, we're going to touch on some of the major themes, but our job is to learn the Navi through. All right, so we can't park here for too long. So in any event, David, the handsome one, the skillful musician, is called to the palace of Shaul. That's where we're holding right now, and that's verse number 19. Vaishlach Shaul malachim el Yishai. He sends messengers to Jesse. Shaul, the king, sends messengers to Yishai, and he says, "Send me David, your son, that is with the sheep." He must have heard that David was the shepherd. So Jesse doesn't just send over David; he sends over a whole donkey's load of bread, and a pouch of wine and a goat as a gift, a tribute to the king. And he sends David over to Shaul. In verse number 21, Vayavo David el Shaul, David arrives at the palace. I don't know if it was a palace, but in the home of Shaul. And he stands before him. Vayahavehu me'od. It's very significant. And Shaul, the king, loved David me'od, very much. Vahilo nosei chilim, and he made him his arms bearer, his armor bearer. David, although he had that ruddy appearance, a propensity towards blood, and he was a lovable person. You looked at him and you felt like you wanted to connect to this person. You have that with people of great spiritual stature, who are exceedingly humble and exceedingly good. You just like them. When you see them, you just like them. If you've ever seen a great leader of the Jewish people, it's the most pleasant experience just to walk into and sit in a room with these people. You feel like they love you before they even say a word to you. You feel their deep love and their humility. It's something extremely humbling and moving to sit in front of the presence of a great person. And Shaul sees David and he loves him very much, which tells you about the nature of David. Before even getting to know him, Shaul loved him very much. He was that type of person. So Shaul doesn't just ask him, to come, help me out, but he sends a message to David's father, and he says to him, David has found favor in my eyes, therefore I want him to stand before me. I don't want him to be your worker anymore. Yishai, send him out of Beit Lechem. I want him to live by me. I want him to stay with me. Let him be my attendant. And it would be, which I assume the answer was yes, right? You don't say no to the king. It doesn't tell us the response of Yishai, but that's obviously what happened. And it would be whenever the evil spirit of melancholy would pass over Shaul, David would take the harp and he would play the music. And then Shaul would feel relief and it would be good for him. And this bad, sad spirit would pass away from Shaul. So David was the medicine of Shaul, which is so fascinating. In a few chapters we're going to see Shaul chasing David to kill him. But you see, this was the antidote to his sadness, was the sweet songs of David HaMelech, which the Radak told us at this point he was composing Tehillim. He had gotten the special Ruach HaKodesh that Hashem gave him, and he was able to not just produce good songs, but supernaturally good songs. Rabbi Eisman, in that book that I mentioned, he suggests, I think it's from him, he suggests, where did David learn to sing such songs that truly uplift the broken spirits? No, it's not Rabbi, this is from the book of our heritage. Where did he learn such songs that could repair a soul? How did he know what it feels like to be so broken and to be able to put it back together through beautiful songs? So he says it was the personal upbringing of David which enabled him to empathize and to do exactly what Shaul needed. Was not David dejected his entire upbringing? Was he not the young lad that was out there with the sheep that nobody wanted to be around, that his own brothers cursed him? He felt like he was a stranger in his own family. And he had learned to console himself and to connect to God and strengthen his faith in God and produce beautiful music that was able to restore his own soul. And here he's taking that skill that he had developed because of his own personal experience, and he was using it to uplift the current king of Israel. A beautiful insight into how you see that the broken past of David is enabling him to do his job properly. And that's going to be a theme throughout his story, that his broken past is actually going to give him all the tools that he needs to do his job properly. And here in a micro sense, you see that there's that music that he learned how to play when he was out there shepherding, because you have nothing else to do, you learn an instrument. And it was that self-rehabilitation that he was likely doing consistently that enabled him to rehabilitate Shaul and remove that evil spirit from him. A beautiful idea. I believe it's from Eliyahu Kitov, from the Sefer HaTodah, the book of our heritage, a good translation in English. I've not seen it in a while, but I think that's where I got that idea from. Okay.
Another question.
Yes.
Why did Jesse prepare the that whole bunch of goodies for Saul.
Why did he do it? Is that what your question is?
Yes,
He's the king.
because Jesse knew that David was anointed.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. Jesse was one of the only human beings on the planet. He was one of 9 other people that knew about this. That's so interesting. Oh, yeah, on the one hand, he was the king, right? The simple answer is the king sends for a request. You don't just give him the request, you also give him a goodie basket. On the other hand, I wonder, if he's sensing some future attention, like my son's going to take over your throne. I want to make sure we're on good terms and like we love you. No hard feelings. That's a fascinating thought. Interesting. You have to wonder, like when Shaul gets when Jesse gets the telegram to send his son, who was just anointed, to the palace, to go see the king. You have to wonder what he was thinking. Like, what interesting providence that's causing this. Very fascinating. I never thought about that angle. Thank you. Okay, so now we begin chapter 17. Chapter 17 is the showdown, David versus Goliath in the Hebrew. And it's going to first give us a background of the skirmishes and the fighting that was happening between the Philistines and the Jews at that time, and the tremendous distress that the Jews are under. Are we all together so far? So far, so good. We can continue? Yeah? Okay, so great. So we're moving forward here. Chapter 17, Perek Yud Zayin. Vayasvu Philishtimes machanehem lamilchama, and the Plishtim gathered their camps to war. Vayasvu socho asher leYehuda. They would gather in Yehuda, in the territory of Yehuda, a place called Socho, and they would encamp bein Socho ven Azekah be'efes damim. It's telling us proper nouns here, the place that they would encamp. But the important part in terms of the story is this shows the great nerve and confidence that the Plishtim had. They weren't attacking from their own borders. They had gone into Israel proper once again and encamped themselves in the territory of Yehuda. In the territory of Yehuda, in Socho and the places that it mentions here. Which shows the strength and the lack of fear that they had, and also the timidness of the Jews to fight back. Could it be that they had heard about Shaul being depressed? Maybe they heard that the king of Israel is depressed right now. It's a good time to attack. And the morale of the Jewish people is down. Maybe they heard about that. Or it could just be that they're really awful people and they really hated the Jews. And even though they had been smashed time and again by Shmuel, now Shmuel is older, and Shaul, also had been the leader of that army. Now Shmuel is older. Shaul is starting to fade as well, and we'll take any opportunity we can to fight against the Jewish people. But the significant part of this opening sentence of the chapter is the Plishtim had a strong foothold in Eretz Yisrael proper, and that was devastating the Jewish people. The Shaul v'Ish Yisrael Nasfu, the Jewish people together with Shaul would gather together and encamped in that area in the valley of Elah. And they would have skirmishes with the Plishtim, a battle here, a battle there. The Plishtim encamped on one mountain, and the Jewish people on the other mountain. The valley was between them. And then, Ish habeinaim mimachanot Plishtim. An interesting expression, Ish habeinaim means the in-between man. An in-between man came and stood between the two camps. Goliath Shemo Migat. His name was Goliath. Govho Sheish Amot Vazaret. And he was 6 amas and 1 zeret tall. An amma is a cubit, which is a distance from, I don't know if I can't see my own camera, it's a distance from your elbow to your middle finger. And he was 6 of those. And a zeret is the distance between your thumb and your pinky when you spread out, which is a half an amma. So you're 6.5 ammas tall, which amounts basically, let's say 13 feet-ish. He was an absolute mammoth, a giant. Extremely tall person. And his name was the in-between man, Ish HaBeinayim. What'd you say, Moshe?
It's closer to about 10 feet.
10 feet? How do you figure? An amma, I would assume, is under a little
Almost
bit under 2 feet.
About a foot and a half.
About a foot. I was thinking closer to 2 feet. I think maybe I took the Chumash shear. Okay. Suffice to say, he was really, really tall. Okay. 10 to 12 feet. And he's called the Ish HaBeinaim. Why is he called the in-between man? Number one is because he was literally standing in between the two camps. Another is the word Beinayim also has the same root as binyan, like a building. He was built like a fortress. His physical, not just he was tall, but he was also a very strong, big man. Like he was a standing building. Additionally, he was the middle of his brothers. And the book of Chronicles, Divrei Yamim, talks about the sons of Harapha, which we'll see is actually Orpah, and she has several sons, and the middle one was Goliath. And what it means is not just his placement in the family, but also his size. He wasn't the biggest amongst his brothers. They were all gigantic apparently, and he was like not even the strongest among them. He was the middle one of them. Okay, but this is the middle man. There's one other interpretation, and this lends a lot more significance to the story that's about to happen. If you don't mind me interjecting here with another piece of Midrash. Like I just mentioned, Goliath's mother's name was Harapha. Chazal tell us that is actually Orpah. If you recall, Orpah is the daughter-in-law of Naomi. She's from the story of Ruth that we read on Shavuot. The Chazal tell us, the Gemara tells us that Ruth and Orpah were actually sisters. They were both granddaughters of the king of Eglon, the king Eglon, the king of Moab, and they married brothers, Machlon and Kilion, the sons of Elimelech. And as you recall, when Naomi, who's now bereft of her children and widowed from her husband, she's on the way back from the plains of Moab. She comes back to Eretz Yisrael, so she's accompanied by her two daughters-in-law, who are also widows, Naomi and Ruth and Orpah. And they both go with her to Eretz Yisrael, planning to convert. And after they take 40 steps, Naomi says to them, "What are you doing? Even if I gave birth to sons today, you're not going to be able to get married for a long time. So what are you bothering? You're just going to accompany a widow. This is not a fruitful endeavor. Go back home. You're the daughters of royalty. Go live a life. You're still young." So Ruth, as we know, ended up staying with Naomi. Ruth Davka, she cleaved to her. But Orpah, at that point, even though she took 40 steps forward, she cries, she shed some tears. She gave her a kiss, they exchanged kisses, and Orpah left. That night, the Midrash tells us that Orpah had descended to a despicable level. The lady who was about to convert to Judaism and decided at the last minute to turn back, she had now descended to the darkest depths, and she laid with 100 Philistines on that very night, 100 men and a dog. And somewhere amidst those relations that she had on that night, from amongst those 100 men, Goliath was conceived. And that's why he's called Ish HaBeinaim, the man that's in between. We're not really sure who his father is. He's in between one of those episodes. On that happened on that night, he came from there. This is a wild midrash. Rav Shmuel uses it to show that if a person is holding in a high place, but you're suddenly shooken up, and you have a moment where you just lose your stability, you can sink to extreme lows. When a person gets disturbing news, if something very disturbing happens, you don't just like fall down a notch, but you throw everything out the window and you can fall to a despicable low. And that's what happens to Orpah. Then on that night, she completely let go and went off of a moral cliff. And from that night, Goliath was formed. And it's so profound that the Gemara says that the one who cleaved should slay the one who was kissed. David and Goliath are actually distant relatives, right? David's great grandmother, Ruth, was a sister of the great grandmother of Goliath, right? These are distant relatives standing in front of each other, which we're about to see. So this man Goliath with Ish HaBeinaim, he came from amongst the various relationships that Orpah had on that night. It's a fascinating episode. Happy to discuss it further, but for our story, That's what's relevant. That Goliath was a descendant of Orpah, who was involved in that episode with Naomi and Rus, and a distant relative of Hamelech David. Yeah, was that more? Did that make sense? Did that come out all right? A little bit shocking midrashim over there. Yeah, it sounds wild, and it is. Okay, the pasuk in the pasuk number 5 continues to describe Goliath, his tremendous physical size. The kova nechoshet al rasho, he had a bronze helmet on. The shiryon kaskasim hulavush, and he had armor on. Umishkal asriyon, the weight of the armor, chameshet alafim shekalim, 5,000 shekel of bronze, which amounts to, I have my cheat sheet here, this is the art scroll. We may assume that they're not too different from the shekels we have today. This would amount to his armor weighing about 250 pounds. That's just the armor that he wore. And the blade of his spear weighed 30 pounds. Okay, they're using a generous measure for the shekel. It could be it was 200 pounds. But either way, that's pretty heavy. That's pretty heavy. We're talking about a huge person, extremely strong, extremely intimidating. It just tells you the size, the extent of his equipment, which just tells you about the person himself that's underneath all that armor. It's not just that he was a formidable person physically, but he had this tremendous armor on top of him. So he was like untouchable. In fact, the only part of his body that was exposed, that wasn't beneath armor, was the one slit he had in his helmet so that he could see through. Right? He had a helmet on, covered his entire face, except for a single slit where his eyes could look through. And that's significant. And this is what he did. Vayamod veikral marachot Yisrael. And this man, Goliath, came out. You remember, the Pelishtim are on one side, the Jews are on the other side. And Goliath stood in the middle. Vayomer lahem lama tetzun la'aroch melchama. Instead of having these skirmishes, he says to them, let's just choose one fighter from each side. I'll fight for the Pelishtim. You choose one fighter. We'll battle it out. And the winner takes all. If you win, we'll be your slaves. But if I win, you'll be our slaves. Okay, so God willing, we'll pick up next week with the showdown of David and Goliath, the Isha Beinayim versus the Ishra Oitzon, the kind of David versus the giant Goliath. And this is a fascinating story of epic proportions. All right. Nice learning with you all.
Nice. Teshuvah.
Baruch Tia, have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank
You
you.
as well.
Thank you.
All right, Laila Tov.